Madam Web was directed by S.J. Clarkson and is the latest movie in the Sony universe of Marvel characters, or SUMC as they call, I don't know what they call this thing anymore, but it is the adjacent thing to the MCU that's been taking place with movies like Venom, Let There Be Carnage, and Morbius. This one stars Dakota Johnson as Cassandra Webb, a paramedic in New York in 2003 who begins to have visions of the future after an accident, and she becomes a bit of a clairvoyant. This eventually puts her on a collision course with three teenage girls who are being chased by a man named Ezekiel Sims, who wants to target them because they might have something to do with how his future goes, and now she's in a race against time to help these girls and make sure that they don't get killed by this man. When I think about Madam Web, I know her from some comics, but she wasn't really a prominent character in them. She popped up every now and then. I think the animated series is the most that you get with her with Spider-Man, and that's really about it. Which doesn't sound like a ringing endorsement for a movie, but I would argue that it actually makes it very ripe for, making a movie. Because when you think about it, there's no real origin story here. You could do anything. The possibilities are endless. So I'm looking at this not from the point of view of this is an idea that has nothing to do. I'm thinking of what couldn't you do? And as a result of that, I went into this movie with an open mind. I haven't loved the Sony universe, the things that they've been doing. I didn't love the first Venom. I thought Let There Be Carnage was fine, and I didn't like Morbius at all. And having seen Madam Web, there are a couple of things that I did find very interesting. For one, the clairvoyance stuff that's going on with Cassie, some of it is very interesting. One of the things that happens is that there's this abrasive editing that goes on. It's very quick, flashes, things that you see are about to happen in an immediate moment, and then when it repeats, she's having a hard time wondering, like, wait, didn't we just do this? And she's unable to sort of figure out that this is actually something leading into later. There's a couple of times where she's in public and a certain thing will repeat and she'll go, would this just happen? Did we just have this conversation? I like the idea of that. And when it has to be used in action, when she's on the train for the first time meeting these three girls, the moments where she sees them first get murdered and then eventually play out the situation to go, wait, I think I can save them. I like that as well. That was an interesting idea. They played around with that. They played around with it again in a sequence in a diner, which was also a bit of fun. As far as the performances go, I thought Dakota Johnson was fine. I think she did a fairly decent job with what she had to work with. And I can say the same for the other three girls, Sydney Sweeney, Celeste O'Connor, and Isabella Merced. I think all three of them were fine. Everybody did an okay job. The suits that they're eventually in, when you see them all costumed up, they look great. The costume designer does deserve a round of applause for that. It's very well done stuff. I mean, I have to give credit where it's due. And when it comes to capturing the vibe of 2003, I think they did a fairly good job. In fact, if I had to remember 2003, I was not in New York that time, but I can tell you this much. There were certain things that do stay in common. For instance, the kind of music. I think Britney Spears was playing everywhere. This movie has Toxic playing in it at one point of time. In one point of time, Cassandra is parking her car. Above her is a poster of Beyonce's Dangerously in Love, the album cover. I guess that's a nice little nod. But beyond that, I have run out of positives. Unfortunately, I didn't really like the movie. And normally on this channel, I have kind of stepped away from talking about too many things, but there were a lot of thoughts I had here. And one of the things that I want to do with this video is not just necessarily go into this movie is like bad or something. I want to also break down what exactly went wrong. One of those things is a paradox because I just mentioned earlier it was something that I didn't mind too much, and that was the abrasive editing. While it works for some of those clairvoyant sequences and it kind of goes with that effect of seeing something very quickly, like a deja vu, at the same time, the movie itself is so abrasive that it sometimes makes it very hard to connect too much. And there's this whiplash that is going on with all of the scenes, and you kind of just don't get enough time to breathe. There's a little bit early on in the movie, but that's gone very quick. And because the movie has a lack of momentum, especially during the second act, it really starts to take an effect, and it just makes the film feel like a frustrating watch, which was really disappointing because I think, again, with those concepts that were interesting, they could have done something really, really cool. But it doesn't quite go the distance with that. But where I think the movie does suffer the most is with the script. It is very scattered. There are things that are happening that just do not mesh together in the best ways. Some of it is very, very rushed. The actual origin stuff regarding why Cassandra has the powers that she has, it feels like an afterthought. Like, we get to it much later. And I just feel like when we finally get to it, it's like, wow, we are almost out of time. It doesn't feel like we got to spend too much time there. What it really becomes is the movie about saving the girls from this guy, Ezekiel Sims, who, let's talk about him, because the whole plot of the movie revolves around this guy's mission to get them. And I have issues with this character. For one, as a villain, he has very little to zero motivation for doing any of this. You have some kind of idea early on that he wants to get these girls because something is going to happen in the future. But we have no basis for why or what's going to lead to that. And because there's no such, lead in, there's nothing to really care about. Like, if you're a villain, or if you're any character fighting for your life, I'm looking at that going, well, I should have something to understand why you're fighting for your life. Otherwise, I just feel like it's a very selfish thing and I don't have anything to care about. And that's kind of what happened with it. But I think what eventually becomes the problem too is that you are noticing in the filmmaking that some of this feels like an afterthought. But I don't mean that in the sense of the scripting. I also mean that in the sense of how the lines are in the movie. Because this is a very bizarre thing to notice in 2024, but most of his dialogue, 95% of it, is ADR'd. Now, that's not to say like, ADR by, definition is a bad thing. But in this case, you can clearly tell in moments that whatever he is saying in the ADR line does not match what is being said through his actual lips at that time. So whatever he's saying right now, like if these lips were moving, those are not the words coming out. And as soon as I noticed that, it happens a few times, I kept going, this feels like someone came in later on and said, you know what, we don't see the motivation. We got to write something in real quick. And it sort of revamped that a little. And maybe I'm wrong. Maybe that's definitely not what happened, but it feels like something that just came together very quickly. And because of that, it just makes his dialogue also super repetitive. Like, I think he says, I need to get them, otherwise there will be trouble in the future, like 75 times in the movie. That's like most of his dialogue. And I mentioned that the movie is kind of a labored, frustrating pace. That's also because it is riddled with exposition. The movie has so much of that. Every other line of dialogue is explaining the story or explaining where the characters are in that. Not really having many organic moments. There's one scene which I thought felt like an organic moment, and it's a moment where Cassie's talking to the girls about CPR. And I thought that was the one moment where it's like, yeah, that feels like an actual conversation. Everything else feels like information is just being given, and it becomes so disconnecting. But by the end, I just was like, well, can we get to something? There's not a lot of interesting stuff in Madam Web until the final 15 minutes where something happens and then the movie ends. And until that point, that's about an hour and 39 minutes or so later, it's like, all right, now we're getting somewhere. But beyond that, I was having such a hard time finding more positives, like except for a few moments here and there. And eventually the movie just ends up being a huge mess. Now, granted, you might watch Madam Web and enjoy it way more than I do. And if that's the case, more power to you. I don't want to be that one person who's like, you're not gonna like this movie. I know people who watched Morbius who liked Morbius. I know people who watched the first Venom who really liked the first Venom and Let There Be Carnage and stuff. That is great, and more power to you. Once again, if you do enjoy this movie more, let me know. Let me know in the comments. Let me know that you guys were satisfied with it. As for me, I cannot say the same, and I wish it was a better movie overall. I'm gonna give Madam Web a 4.5 out of 10. That said, I will always show up for the movies with these actors down the line, whatever else they end up making next. I am very curious to see where else their careers go. I mean, some of them have already got some big stuff lined up ahead, so that's going to be pretty exciting. Can't wait to see that. And there is always that door, always the next thing. Guys, thank you very much for watching. Look forward to more videos very, very soon. As always, if you like this, please do subscribe, and I will see you guys at the movies.